We are beginning chapter 36. So with chapter 36, we have a couple of introductory vocabulary phrases that would be wise for us to familiarize ourselves with right now. And this way, when we come across them in the text, we'll understand their full meaning, not just their translation. So a couple of, again, Hebrew terms that we're going to encounter. One is the words or the phrase is which translates as higher and lower worlds, or upper and lower worlds. Now, of course, when we use the term worlds in this context, we are not describing planets or spaces, and we use the word higher and lower, we're not describing a spatial relativism. Rather, the word world, olam, is also the word for hidden or concealed. And so the distinction between what we describe as upper worlds and lower worlds is actually about the greater or lesser awareness of Hashem. So in higher worlds, the awareness of Hashem is more obvious, and in the lower worlds, Hashem is less obvious. Another phrase that we're going to come across is, again, they're all necessary, is the word tachlis. And the full phrase is tachlis hishtalshalis ha'olamos. Tachlis means the conclusion, the end, the ultimate purpose for which we do something. And the core point, which is something that you're all familiar with from other teachings in Hasidus, is that the ultimate purpose for which Hashem created the world is going to be this lowest of worlds, that is the least naturally intuitive, aware level of godliness. Another phrase we're going to talk about is nisava or taiva. Now, generally, we use that term as a negative because we talk about our taivas are our desires, and we try to overcome our desires when we think of them as being impetuous and fleeting and trivial and self-indulgent. However, of course, the term nisava or taiva doesn't mean that it's always bad. Our most profound taiva is to stay alive. We would argue that we have an even more profound taiva, which is to be connected with Hashem, to be aligned with the infinity of Hashem. And in context, we're going to be talking about the taiva for which Hashem created the world, which we will discuss in some length, because it does appear to be a somewhat unusual phrase to describe Hashem by, because when we think of the word taivas, we think of items or objectives that are outside of our basic identity. And of course, nothing is outside of Hashem's basic identity. Yes. You're on mute. You have to unmute.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. When you say taiva, then that brings to mind then like how the Rabbi always said that every person deep inside really craves to be a Jew. Is that kind of like the good?
That's the ultimate taiva, right? And we use the word colloquially often to refer to indulgences and silliness and passing transient pleasures. Mm-hmm. We argue, though, that the ultimate desire for which all other things would be overcome on the physical level is to stay alive. Like a person has a taiva to stay alive, even if life is not only filled with joys and pleasures. Hasidus makes the argument that we would even be willing to give up our physical life for our relationship with Hashem. So our truest, most profound taiva is to be aligned with Hashem. The context of this chapter is going to be speaking about Hashem's taiva, which I know is sort of sounds unusual, and yet we will see it sourced in the Medrash, and we will discuss it in great length. So these phrases become, again, not only that we should know their meaning, but their translation, but their contextual import and significance as they are discussed here. Now, we begin here in chapter 36. Taiva is a desire, yeah. And again, the word desire meaning not just like I'd like it, like I'd like to have a salami sandwich, something passing. It is that which is drives the entirety of the person. And we'll see it again in context as the chapter unfolds. Now, In the previous chapter, we started to talk about the presence of Hashem within a person's life and awareness. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about not only that we are longing for the presence of Hashem, it's that Hashem is longing to be present amongst the people. So this chapter begins with a vav, and remember our general rule of thumb is that when chapters begin with a vav, that's a suggestion that it's a continuum of the previous chapter. And the end of the previous chapter, we talked about where is the divine presence? Where is God to be found most profoundly? Now, if a person is not familiar with the teachings of Hasidus, and we sort of stopped the man on the street and we did a random interview, and we would say, where do you suppose that you will find God most profoundly? So one argument would be, oh, you find God in holy things, whether it's in heaven, it's in the spiritual world, it's in the spiritual people, and it's in the spiritual circumstances, Shabbos, Yom Kippur, in the spiritual places, Yerushalayim, the Beis Hamikdash, the Shul, and so. Now, of course, the answer to that is true. The impact that Hasidus brings to the world, which again is something that we are so familiar with because it's quoted time and time again, and this is really the source, is that the most profound and the greatest taiva, the greatest desire of Hashem, is to be found in the areas, and again, not only geographically, in the circumstances that are least naturally aligned with the infinity of Hashem. The place that he is least immediately presumed to be in. So if Hashem is there already, it's a less of of import. Now, this is very counter to our general life experience. I mean, not us, we're perfect. Commonly, people naturally gravitate to like-minded other people. There is a modern issue that we're talking about, that one of the problems with the internet and Google is that you always find what you're looking for. So you're never exposed, a person is less likely to be exposed to something that they are not already familiar with. So whereas, when we were kids and you went to the library and you would go sort of browsing and you knew what you thought you were interested in, you might happen upon something that you didn't anticipate you were interested in and thus become interested in it. And this way your horizons became expanded. When we have Google, and we know what we're looking for, we Google that up, and it right away shows up. So it's led, and this is a broader sort of outside of a Torah concept, but perhaps as an analogy, to people becoming far more entrenched in their preset ideas, because they're seeking out and finding like-minded other people with whom they share all of their time and their discussion and so on. And the likelihood of being even exposed to somebody who may disagree with them or other completely independent perspectives or ideas is greatly diminished because they're so focused in on what they are looking for. And again, there's a certain comfort when I am associating with people who are like me, and we have a common conversation, and so on. Hashem is not looking for that. He's got plenty of admirers. All the angels say, holy, holy, holy. Hashem is looking specifically to find those who are naturally less aware, less intuitively aligned, and to create an alliance with them. This is the concept which, again, we are so familiar with, and this is really the source of it because it's so fundamental to Hasidus. Now, this is not only true as we're talking about Hashem's relationship with the world, it's true as we know it, call it socially and culturally in the whole culture of Chabad. That is, whereas in other communities, their natural gravitation is to align themselves with similar and like-minded others, and it's not that they have anything against other people, it's just not their concern. It's not what they are naturally, I would say, worried about. They have their immediate circle. They surround themselves with people with whom they find collegiality and basically agreement. and they're perfectly content. I mean, it's a very satisfying relationship to be around people who agree with me. And in Chabad, our whole biggest mission is, how can I find the most radically different person and be aligned and associated with that person, that we can transform. And again, not in a deviant manner, not like I'm going to go out there and change the guy in the sense of triumphalism, but how can I make friends with the person who is naturally most unlike me? Well, in a sense, this becomes, or this is the product of Hashem's desire to find welcomingness in the least naturally aligned of circumstances. There is a story, it may even be a true story. We talked about it once before. Maybe it's worth repeating just for a moment, that in the early 50s, when there were so many European Yidden who had come to America after the war, and they sort of didn't have a place. You know, their communities had been devastated and completely wiped out. And so they went looking around to what felt somewhat familiar to them. And they had a more natural alliance with the Hasidic communities. They spoke Yiddish. They were familiar with the protocols and rebbes and so on. This is what they were accustomed to in Europe. So they came experimenting, and many of them eventually blended into the Chabad community. And the Rebbe was a big advocate that they should retain their individual minhagim and their streimlach and long coats and other minhagim that should not become lost. Even if they became Lubavitcher Chassidim, they should still hold on to that character of their origin. So the story goes, whether it's a true story or not, that there was one such man who came to see the Rebbe, and he had some advice. You know, everybody's a know-it-all. So he advised the Rebbe that if the Rebbe will put on a shtreimel, he'll have all these Yidden will come to him, because to them, that's what a Rebbe looks like. A Rebbe wears a shtreimel. And to see the Rebbe in a hat like everybody wears and a kaput like everybody wears, that's not what they're accustomed to. So he's got advice. The Rebbe should put on a shtreimel, and this way he will garner all of these Hasidim. So the story goes, take it out for what it's worth, the Rebbe said, but how many Zionist youth, and we know at that time, that term, Shomer HaTzair, the Zionist youth were very antagonistic to Frumkeit. They saw Zionism as the antidote to the Holocaust. And the Rebbe's, again, the message, whether it's a literal story or it's apocryphal, illustrates the point. I'm looking to sort of befriend people who are not naturally aligned with me. And if you think about, strategically, this man's suggestion seemed like a good idea. 1950, whatever, how many Chassidim were there in 770? You can see the pictures, a handful. And here you'll get instantaneous, I use this term somewhat jokingly, clientele. You'll build your ranks. You'll build up. Now you'll have a big giant shul and you'll have a lot of people. The Rebbe said, no, we're not going to do that. Now here we are 70 years later, and not that we need convincing, but the Rebbe has Chassidim all over the world. Not only people who came from Europe who were looking for something familiar. And that tendency for a person to fall into the comfortable and the familiar, rather than take the daring risk of aligning with those who are not naturally, I don't want to say they're not, God forbid, that they're not your friend, but they're not naturally similar. It doesn't feel naturally comfortable. It was an enormous risk that Hashem takes and the Rebbe takes. So again, if we were projecting this out, Hashem would seemingly be much more comfortable with the angels. They're all spiritual and they're very holy and they're naturally aligned and they have no other interest and they're great admirers and so on. That's not where Hashem's attention is. His attention is on people, even though people are, I'm hungry and tired and I have this issue and that issue and complaining and all kinds of troubles, et cetera, et cetera. Nevertheless, or we might say specifically because of that, that's where Hashem's attention is, in the lower worlds. That is the statuses where Hashem is not naturally, intuitively, indigenously welcomed. That's where Hashem is specifically fixated, that he wants to find this kind of alliance therewith. So Maidazois, know ye this, meaning this, the Alter Rebbe is quoting as a definitive statement based on, again, it's not the Alter Rebbe is making it up. It comes from a medrash. Maimar Razal, the statement of our sages. Now, this statement, which is, bread and butter of Chassidus, is from the Medrash Tanchuma in Parshas Nosai. Parshas Nosai, we're going to read not next Shabbos, but the Shabbos after. And it's in the Medrash Tanchuma, which is one of the books of analysis of Medrash, that it says, Shetachlis Brias Ha'olam Hazeh, the ultimate purpose. Now, this becomes very important, and we talk about this again a lot in Chassidus, this term tachlis. And if we think about any chore that we go about in our day, Chassidus uses a common mashal, which is a person going on a form of a business trip. So the person gets up in the morning. That's what does he want to do? He wants to get up on time. And he gets his horse and wagon ready. So if you ask him, what do you want to do? I want to get my horse and wagon ready. And he goes on his journey. What he has to be very careful about is not to confuse what he wants to do with the tachlis. What is the tachlis? The tachlis is to arrive at the business meeting and execute the deal. I mean, as we're learning with Zoom and everything, you don't have to get on the horse and you don't have to get up. And if you can execute the deal on Zoom, so all those other stages, which the person thought they wanted to do, and if you would ask the person, what do you want to do? That's what I want to do. I want to get on the horse and the travel, blah, blah, blah. That's not what he wants, the tachlis. And this is something that's so important for us always to remember. We talk about this. It's a very strong message in parenting. We're so committed that our child should learn how to read, drive, pass the test, graduate high school, etc. But what's the tachlis? Don't lose sight. This is your child. It's not, we can become distracted by steps along the way and forget what is the tachlis. That's the crucial word. The word is tachlis. It's such an important term. Now, how do we know that the tachlis is this world? And the answer is, it's like, why is everything always in the last place you look for it? Because once you find it, you stop looking. Because Hashem didn't create anything after this world. The whole process of what is called the Seder Hishtalshlus, the whole process that how Hashem went from infinity down to the ultimate, this world with all of its material items and its natural non-awareness of Hashem, it stopped here. So tachlis, the word itself, means the ultimate purpose, the end. It is the same word, or it's the root word, is the same word for kol, everything, kala, to complete. The wife is called the completion. The whole purpose of coming into the world is to get married and have children and raise a family and so on. That is the ultimate purpose. So we have all along our lives, I can only imagine, come across times when we sometimes mix up what is the process and what is the tachlis. And it's very important that we reorient ourselves and know what our tachlis is. Our tachlis sometimes gets confused. The Shabbos and the tachlis of the week, or is Shabbos the way that I get ready for the next week? We might think Shabbos is great and it gets me rest so that I can go out during the week and I can consume. That's turning Shabbos into a launching pad for the week. Or do I say, as we do every day in the davening, 1 day till Shabbos, 2 days till Shabbos, what is the tachlis? What is the ultimate objective for which I am focusing all of my efforts? And what is a means to an end? It's a little bit, maybe this is more men than women, but it's like, so what do you do for a living? Oh, my friend who has his joke, we say something, so what do you do? And the guy says, I'm an engineer, I'm a baseball player, I'm an accountant. And no. That's what God did for you. What do you do? What is the tachlis of all of those things? Is that the tachlis, or is that the means so that I can, support my family, have Shabbos, and so on and so forth? So does Shabbos serve the week, or does the week serve Shabbos? This is tachlis. This is such a crucial point that we in our own lives and here as well in relationship with Hashem, the tachlis, the ultimate brias olam hazeh of this, the creation of this world. Because Hashem created, remember we've talked about this so often, other stages of awareness, lesser, greater stages of awareness of Hashem. The place that is more naturally, intuitively aware of Hashem are what we call the higher, that is less obfuscated, less clouded, greater awareness stages of being, worlds. Those are more naturally aligned with Hashem. That's where Hashem is going to find a greater set of automatic friends. That's where I'm going to feel comfortable. The question is, or the objective is, that Hashem should go into the circumstance that is less naturally comfortable, that is naturally very uncomfortable, this physical world where Hashem shows up and we say, hold on, I'm busy. I got other things to do. I mean, as all the nations coming up to Shavuos, all the nations said, oh, hold on, I have an agenda. If your agenda matches my agenda, I'm willing to accept it. If it doesn't, no, thank you. And we, the Jewish people, said, Nasiv and Nishma, we'll do it, and then we'll understand it. We'll be committed, and then we'll understand. That is, we commit to you, and that was why it was so special. And this is that common theme, time and time again. We talked about it. That's why when we do a mitzvah, I am not the holiest person, and I don't have the awareness of Hashem that's comparable to our forefathers or to Moshe, and so on. So we might think, okay, but Hashem will live with what he can get. Our argument is it's quite the contrary. The natural distance, or the perceived distance is a better way of saying it. It's not really truly distant. The perceived distance that I have, that gets overcome. And that's why mitzvahs are done with the part of me that's not naturally aligned. My nefesh elokis, my godly soul, which is all gung-ho for Hashem, loves Hashem, go Hashem, is not the one who does the mitzvahs. Because, of course, he does the mitzvahs. It's like, if your mother thinks you're very special, it's a beautiful thing, but it's not really an accomplishment. There's a natural proclivity for that, and this is the caution that not us, of course, but people tend to surround themselves with a bunch of other people who all are naturally, we surround ourselves with a bunch of people who agree with each other, and we sit around and we talk about how great we are. And what Hashem is looking for is those who don't naturally have that alliance, not the angels, not the spiritual beings, and that they should have this type of not only acknowledgement, and they should, again, overcome their own interests for the interest of Hashem. Shenesava, that Hashem has a passion. There's that word. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we'll talk about why it uses that word. I know, remember this time around, we said we're going to analyze each word. So I know we did 2 lines. It's already been half an hour, but you feel free to call out the shepherd's crook and tell me to keep going. I don't mind, but I thought we want to sort of analyze each word. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Liyos Lei, should be for him, Dira B'tachtainim, a dwelling place in the lowest of circumstances. Okay, a lot of words going on here. And again, this is something that it's bread and butter of Hasidus. It's number one. It's constantly emphasized. And if people are not familiar with this medrash, which, look, just amongst us, we wouldn't be familiar with it either. It's an obscure medrash, which I can't tell you what it says in the paragraph before, the paragraph after. This is not page 1 of the Chumash. And if not for the Alter Rebbe bringing it to our attention, we probably wouldn't know it either. So we shouldn't be surprised when you go out into the Torah world and people who are familiar with Torah, and you tell them this idea. They're like, what are you talking about? They never heard of this. That Hashem wants to be here. What do you mean Hashem wants? What do you mean Hashem has a passion? Why would Hashem want to be down here? Doesn't Hashem want to be in the holy places, in Yerushalayim, in the yeshivas, and so on and so forth? So why is it? So, and there's so many ways in which this manifests itself. So let's try to break it down into little bitty bite-sized pieces, and we'll take it one step at a time. So again, reminder of the word tachlis, ultimate purpose. Afterward, that's it. Now you've achieved the objective. When the guy in the analogy we said makes the sale, he goes home. He doesn't, and if he can make the sale without the horse and the traveling, he does it. And how important it is that we stay focused on what is the ultimate objective, and it's kind of been a curious illustration as we are becoming so more techno savvy, we're starting to realize that a lot of the steps of the things that we did are not really necessary. And sometimes that's very disruptive because, like, what am I supposed to do now? How am I supposed to deal with, like, what do I do now? Now, it used to be you had to go to the library and find an encyclopedia if you wanted to find out who the 14th vice president was. Now you ask Siri, and in 2 seconds, it's done. So, like, well, what am I supposed to do with all this time now? And so on. So what is the tachlis? Is the tachlis the process, and so on? So the tachlis, absolute tachlis.
Zoom Tanya class.
Sorry?
We take Zoom Tanya class.
Right, exactly.
That's what we do.
Right. Baruch Hashem. So what does it mean, nisava? So the word nisava, taiva, means to have a passion. Now, again, in colloquial terms, we usually talk about, oh, taivas, because we think of taivas as being shallow and trivial. But of course, there are taivas that are meaningful and transformative. We just had it actually in the parsha. In last week's parsha that we read yesterday, we speak about the obligations of an owner to a servant. It's really slave, but you can't say the word slave. People get crazy. It's also the same for employers and employees. It doesn't matter whether you're paying him or you prepaid for his services. And one of the laws is it is prohibited for the employer to give his employee bitter work. So Rashi says, what is bitter work? That you ask him for tea, he brings you tea and you spill it out. That it's just mindless and purposeless, and it's prohibited. So we don't assume, of course, Hashem can do whatever he wants, but we don't assume that Hashem would be cruel. And Hashem gives us assignments and he says, well, I don't really need it. It's just for you. You know, I told you to keep kosher, but I don't care because I'm God. What do I care? I think we've used this example probably at least 14 times before. It would be very disappointing if after 120 years, a person would come up to Shemayim and they would say, Hashem, I did it. I did all the mitzvahs. And Hashem would say, oh, I hope you liked it. Well, what do you mean? I did it for you. Me, I'm God. What do I care what you do? I mean, that wouldn't feel very gratifying. That would feel very much like the employer who spills out the tea. What do you drove me around and around in all these circles, and I bypassed all kinds of pleasures. I thought I'm doing it for you, and you're like, well, I'm God. I don't care what you do. So we take God's requests not only seriously for us, we take it very seriously for Hashem, that it is truly important. Now, when you say this term, you know, God needs or wants, people go, oh, because we tend to think of needs and wants as something that is less than our character. For example, when a person needs to eat, this is less than, because we get weak. We don't eat. We get weak and grumpy, hangry. So we are dependent, and it's kind of embarrassing. We're dependent on animals, meat, or fish, or vegetables, which ultimately are dependent on the soil. So that is a need that is somewhat degrading. We have to realize that we're dependent on dirt, because without the dirt, you can't grow vegetables and fruit. And without the vegetables and fruit, you can't live, or the animals can't live, and so on. This is in part why there is a term in the Gemara that says that when Mashiach will come, there'll be no eating and drinking, meaning we will no longer have this weakness, this need, the need for sleep, and so on. These are needs that are born of, again, a weakness. It's not a failing, but it's a weakness. And as we know that when a person is very, very engaged in something, they don't need to eat so much. Every kid who's playing and his mother calls him in for lunch, he says, but we're playing. I don't want to eat lunch. Or if we're really engaged in something that's fascinating, that's captured our attention and our passion, we don't need so much sleep. So sleeping and eating are examples of needs that, I don't want to say degrade, because that's too harsh a word, but they are representative of our limitations. We also have needs that uplift us, like the need for friendship, the need for purpose and meaning, that we should sense that our lives are committed to something greater than just sitting on the couch. The need for other people, the need for community and camaraderie. These are not just weaknesses, although the world sometimes tries to mock it. We would exalt it. The child's need for the parent can be like a small child who needs their parent to make them lunch. And then there is a need that is of the adult child who doesn't need anything from their parent. They can make their own lunch in their own life. And yet they have this great passion for the parent. That is the relationship that Hashem has with us when we say Hashem has this taiva, this passion, this desire. It's not a desire born of a weakness. Hashem didn't create the world because he was dependent on something. He created it because Hashem wants something, a need, but an uplifting need. And again, in secular society, there's a mockery of needing. If a person's really a sort of superman, he doesn't need anything. I don't need nothing from nobody is sort of a term that is exalted. And it's never true because, again, we need food and we need education. Someone has to teach us how to cross the street, etc. And yet there is this sort of aspiration. It's not a Torah aspiration that when I become an adult, I don't need anything from anybody. I can completely and totally take care of myself. It's useful if we don't have the needs of that which degrade us. What we aspire to is the needs which uplift us. So again, like we use the word taiva, in the common parlance, we say you have to overcome your taivas because we presume our taivas are silly things or unnecessary frivolities. They don't have to be. There are taivas which uplift us. So this is a taiva that Hashem had. Now, throughout all of the areas of Torah, there is speculation as to why Hashem created the world. Torah, Chumash, just introduces it as a given. In the beginning of creation, God created heaven and earth. The backstory, which is somewhat represented by the first panel of an actual Torah being blank, there's like a margin, and we ask, why is that? We're not about wasting. So one of the explanations or the metaphoric interpretations is what came before Torah or before creation, meaning what prompted Hashem to create the world. And especially as it's explained in the Medrash, and it's even quoted by Rashi, which means it's integral to the understanding of Torah, that Hashem had all kinds of other prototypes which he created. What prompts Hashem to create the world? Why does he decide that he wants to create the world? That's left blank. That's not articulated. Why is it not articulated? Well, these are like very sensitive matters. And when we find out why somebody does something, if we're not scrupulous, if we're unscrupulous, we may use it against them. So the Talmud already begins the first stage, and it speculates as to why God created the world. And there are quotes there which you may be familiar with. God created the world because he is good. It's the nature of good to do good. And therefore, Hashem wants to do kindness and he wants to do good. So he needs to create a recipient, which is meaningful and yet somewhat unsatisfying because not everything Hashem does for me do I appreciate. Well, you say, well, you're like a child. And if your parent tells you you're not allowed to play in the street, you may not appreciate it, but one day you'll grow up. Okay. But again, if he never would have created me, I never would have had this issue. Then there is the concept that Hashem created the world so that the world would know of his true glory. Well, if that's the case, this world, literally Earth, is not maybe the best place because we don't really appreciate it. The higher worlds, the more sophisticated worlds, they do appreciate it. All worthwhile speculations. And then there is this speculation, which I say, again, I don't say it's obscure. It's right there in print, but it's not something that is overtly obvious. It's in the Medrash. It's not even in the Talmud. The Talmud is more of the literal narrative, the rules. And the Medrash is a little bit more like poetry, a little more speculative. It's also directly from Hashem. It's the same authors as the Talmud, as of the Medrash. The character of Medrash is a little more imaginative than the character of the Talmud. So the Medrash uses this unique word, and this is how or why the Alter Rebbe spotlights this statement in the Medrash more than all the other statements, because all the other statements use a word like ratzah, Hashem desired or wanted, but it's not as passionate as this word nesaba. The only time that we find in all the speculations as to why Hashem creates the world, that uses this phrase, nisava, which reaches down to the depth, like again, in the physical level. The most profound taiva is the taiva to be alive. So that's the comparable that we're talking about here. It's not just something in passing, like I might want an apple, but if God forbid the person was starving to death, he would eat an orange. So it's not the apple or the orange that he wants. He wants something else. He wants to be alive. Nisava and tachlis mean this is really the goal. This isn't a step to something else. This is the it. You know, it's like the joke about the man who goes to the kotel for the first time and he wants to daven. So he says, which way is east? What do you mean? This is it. This is east. This is why we face east. This is it. So this is the it, as indicated by this word nisava. What is the it? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Holy One, blessed be He. Now, again, every word is precise. We know, of course, that there are so many different terms that we use for Hashem. You know, all the sanctified names, Elokeinu, Elokim, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, and so on. Why HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Holy One, blessed be He. So in the analysis of this term in general, we describe it as the combination of the two different, maybe even opposites. Kadosh means separated, like we always talk about. Kiddush means we separate out Friday from Shabbos, Shabbos from weekdays. Havdalah is also called Kiddush in the Gemara. And Baruch Hu means connected. Baruch means to connect. So he is separated and connected, separate and together. This is that quality of godliness that straddles both levels. It's a level of godliness that is outside of this world and a level of godliness, that is embedded in this world. And this is the ultimate level. All the higher worlds, greater stages of awareness, both the spiritual stages of Atzilus and Bria, as well as even in our own lives, the times, whether it's Yom Kippur or Shabbos or learning or whatever it may be, are kadosh moments. Where those kadosh moments want to be impactful is in the less evidently godly moments, in the ordinary routines of life, in the bank, in the grocery store, walking around, doing my regular thing on a Wednesday, etc. This is that greatest quality. Now, people who have real jobs, that is not rabbis, they have to deal with this because they're not commonly spending the bulk of their hours amongst naturally sympathetic environments. On the contrary, their environment is probably if at best indifferent and quite possibly antagonistic, and the opportunity therefore is that much greater. So rather than saying, wow, this guy's so lucky that he gets to spend all this time in the yeshiva and he gets to isolate himself from into holiness all the time, like that story we told of the second Rebbe, still in the lifetime of his father, where he kind of rebuked this guy for running out early, and the Chassids sort of came back at him and said, what do you know? I got to deal with all of these drunks and go out and to earn my parnasa. And the Alter Rebbe thanked him, saying, thank you for teaching my son what it means to be a chassid. You know, you sit in yeshiva or in the shul in the holiness all day. What do you know? So rather than saying, well, they're the lucky ones and oh, nuts, the message is, wherever a person is, it's an opportunity to bring Kaddish into Baruch. Are you raising your hand? You got to unmute, though.
Actually, no, I'm listening to you, and Simcha and I were talking about everything you're saying today, and I don't know, we're just like trying to figure out how do we bring this down to our everyday monotony of working and being so darn, tired by the end of the day to even start thinking about it, or how do we bring it into our day? Not just the davening, but just how do we bring it into the mundane things that we're doing?
Well, the number one is the essence of Kiddush Hashem is that you probably don't even realize that you become the representative of Kedusha within an environment that is not very welcoming of Kedusha. So the mere fact that a person conducts themselves in a virtuous, godly manner, especially in an environment that is not predisposed to that and may even, again, be antagonistic to that, they may not like it, they may even be hostile towards it, does have its ongoing impact. I mean, I told this story, it's a longer story, but when the Rebbe was concerned about something going on in the New York City public schools, and people were like, what do you care? You're a Hasidim are not in the New York City public schools. And the Rebbe's point was, it doesn't matter whether my Hasidim go there. Hashem is there. And now there are a few places more antagonistic and hostile to godliness than the New York City public schools. And yet we don't say, well, it's none of my, what do I care? My community is all in yeshiva. My community doesn't go to New York City public schools, so it's none of my business. But that it is our business, and because Hashem is there, and in a certain ironic sense, that's where Hashem's attention is focused. Again, it's not a competition, but in a sense, more so than in the holy places. That Hashem is in the yeshiva and in the shul and in Shabbos and Yom Kippur. It's a wonderful thing, and it shouldn't ever diminish it. That's a little bit more naturally aligned. But the dir b'tachtonim, the dwelling place in the least evident of godly places, in New York City public schools, now we have really accomplished something distinctive. Now we have pushed back against a so what I'm looking for, I don't want to say enemy, it's maybe too harsh a word, but we have transformed something outside to become something inside. Something that's naturally tachtonim has become elyonim. It has become uplifted. So the number one thing is simply by conducting yourself in a godly way, even if they don't notice it. You make a bracha on your lunch in this place that hasn't had a godly word said there in a long, long time.
It's so exhausting. You just hit on, Mrs. Wasserman and I are both teachers in public school. So you hit on exactly what we were talking about yesterday, but it's so exhausting, Rabbi Epstein. Just being there is so exhausting because I'm saying Tehillim in a cloister parking lot at lunch.
Yeah. but that,
exhausting.
Again, I'm not so strong, so I took the easy way out, and I get to be, in a place of holiness. And even when I go into a place of unholiness, there's a certain awareness. Oh, okay, the rabbi's here, everyone behave, or whatever it may be. So I don't know from this struggle. I can only share with you what I've learned in the books, and to emphasize that this is that greatest opportunity. Later the Alter Rebbe uses a strategy that we can have rachmanis, meaning if a person's feeling disconnected from Hashem, what can they do? So the Alter Rebbe says, you know what? Imagine if somebody, the prince, is taken prisoner and he's in the dungeon, and you had the opportunity to free him. You would run to do it. So when your neshama is in that place, you get the chance to free it. By saying Tehillim in that place, you have now liberated your neshama. So it's true that in order to liberate the neshama, I have to go down into the dungeon and I have to deal with the filth that's surrounding. But I'm not focused on the filth. Rather, I get focused on releasing the prisoner, the prince, and that prince is your neshama that is trapped in this parking lot. And by you saying Tehillim, you're releasing it, you're freeing it, you're sending it out into a godly level, rather than allowing it to become corroded with more and more antagonistic spiritual schmutz.
But are you saying then that we should stay in that kind of situation, or are we supposed
again, a person has to recognize there's two levels. One level is wherever a person is, sashkacha pratis, it's a chance to bring godliness into that place. If a person finds himself, just like in their physical health, we wouldn't say go into the dungeon if you're likely to get trapped there with the prince. That wouldn't be healthy. And each person has to speak with their mashpia under their circumstance, whether this is something that's going to be too overwhelming. One of the messages of the story of the splitting of the sea is, let's imagine that Paro didn't change his mind and didn't go chase the Jews down. We're still stuck at the sea there. I mean, this is not whatever. We're going to have to turn around. So one of the messages is that if you get stuck, Hashem will release you. But don't go deliberately putting yourself in those positions. Don't deliberately go and put yourself in the most threatening and antagonistic of circumstances. Should you find yourself there, try to bring the holiness the best you can. And again, each person has to discuss it with their mashpia, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So
Just
what
so
is
you know, though, I just wanted to say that maybe Chpater Lubavitch is much different, but being in a holy place doesn't always mean that it's holy. The yeshiva that I'm in is not always the ideal of what we expect a yeshiva to be. It's just like when you start becoming observant and you expect, I don't know, an example, everybody to eat at your house because now you keep kosher, it's not going to happen because there's always different levels and there's always people learning at different levels and whatever it is. But the places that should be holy also need uplifting on occasion or more often sometimes than on occasion. So the grass isn't always greener just because we expect it to be. It's that when you get there or others get there that do have the same taiva, you have to make it the holy place it should be. So just, I'm sure it is difficult in the public schools. I've been there before as well, but it's not always better just because it has the name yeshiva.
As the saying goes, the grass is greener where you water it.
Yes, and I've been on both ends. I agree with you.
Okay, so what is this taiva that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the connection? It should be his. What? A dira. A dira means a welcoming place. In modern Hebrew means a residence, a place where you're welcomed, where you can be yourself. B'tachteinim, in the least evidently of godly places or circumstances. Now, again, not only for our commitment to overanalyze every word, this line in specific is so central to all of the message of Hasidus Chabad that it's worth even more than standard analysis. So what is it that Hashem wants? He wants it to be his, meaning we all know there's the saying that a good host should make their guests feel at home, and a good guest should remember that he is not at home. So there's a difference between being a guest, the most welcome guest, and making it yours. This is what Hashem wants. He wants it to be his. There is a story, this is actually a true story, that when they built the first Chabad house in Los Angeles, so Rabbi Kunin, who coined the phrase Chabad house, he brought the Rebbe the key to the Chabad house, like a symbolic key. And the Rebbe said, I want to be able to come in anytime I want. So Rabbi Kunin, being Rabbi Kunin, decided that's it, no front door lock, until they had a robbery. Then they realized maybe that's not what the Rebbe meant. But that is a true story. The message being, if you're giving me a key, you're telling me I'm a guest, that I can come in, but I want to be home. I don't want it to be a place where I'm a guest. And again, we've all been guests, I can imagine. And sometimes you have a wonderful host that makes you feel at home. And sometimes you have a less wonderful host who doesn't make you feel so at home and you feel very awkward. And then there's still a difference between being a guest and being home. And sometimes you see it more with your adult children. They come back to your house, they have their own family, and you want them and they feel at home. And you can have a guest who comes every Shabbos and their best friend, but it's still not home. So Hashem wants Liyos Lo. It should be his. He shouldn't be a guest in this world. It should be his world. And he wants a dira. Now, the word dira again means it's the place where you can be yourself. Now, sometimes we think, what does it mean to be myself? It means to not be on my good behavior, that I can be sloppy. When I go to other people's houses, when I have guests, I have guest behavior. But when they're not looking, then I can be messy. That's not what we mean. We mean where I can truly express myself. A person is socialized to be appropriate to context. And therefore, we withhold, if we're in a circumstance and we know we have an opinion that's maybe not the most popular opinion, or it's a contrarian opinion, we minimize and so on, because we know we're a guest and we don't want to be disruptive and aggressive, or even to upstage the host. We don't want to become the center of attention because we're a guest. It doesn't only mean that the people are doing something bad. When we're home, again, it doesn't have to be combative or contrarian. When we're home, we get to express ourselves fully and completely. And again, this is in a positive sense. So it's the same thing with Hashem. Sometimes we say, why doesn't Hashem do more and more miracles? Coming up to Shavuos, Hashem said, look, I did it. And you got scared. I revealed myself. At science. I want to be able to reveal myself, but it's a little too much for you. So how do I change that? How do I make myself welcome in the Tachtonim? Now, the Tachtonim, again, as we said, it's a representative of our physical life. This is where Hashem wants to be. We're not so just sort of treading water until we get to heaven. And we're not some sort of ancillary, broken down place that Hashem, well, I guess I got to deal with you, but really you're like the second-class citizen, and I'd really rather deal with the smart people. I want to hang around with the beautiful people in Atzilus and Bria and Yetzirah. But, okay, I'm a nice guy, so I'll pay attention to you too. You can play also. We'll include you too. I roll. On the contrary, this is where Hashem's focus is. So we ask the question, we say every day in the davening that the angels, the angels of fire, the srafim, the holy entities, all of these stages of total awareness, even they cannot accept the infinity of Hashem. And they declare, where is the glory of God? So why is Hashem so focused on our incorporation of his essence within our existence? That's not only, even if the angels could do it, that'd also be an accomplishment, because they also are naturally detached and separated from Hashem. And thus our answer is, because this is the most profound transformation. And here's the kicker. When Hashem reveals himself to the angels and the Chayos HaKodesh, the holy entities, and the fiery angels, and all of these lofty, they cease to exist. They become completely and totally subsumed within the infinity of Hashem. When Hashem reveals himself to us, we become more validated in our existence, because Hashem needs us to do the mitzvahs. So, of course, on the one hand, Hashem reveals himself to us and we get very scared, or we ignore it. Only human beings could ignore all of the miracles. We can walk away from it and say, yeah, whatever. Well, when Hashem reveals himself to us and we absorb it, we accept it. We make this dir b'tachtonim. We don't cease to exist. Our existence becomes that much more crucial, literally crucial. And as the core message of Tanya about every step of the way and zero tolerance, and in every moment to be fixated and focused on our relationship with Hashem, and what is it that am I connected with God at this moment, and so on. The more I welcome Hashem into my existence, the more I become, hopefully, or definitely, I become more, I use this word, validated in my existence. My existence becomes that much more substantiated. Maybe that's a better word. Because Hashem wants my existence, because as we've talked about, angels and souls do not shake the lulav. They don't light candles. They don't put up mezuzahs. They just surrender themselves to the infinity of Hashem. And mitzvahs, as we have talked about, are the whole purpose which Hashem created the world. Now, the Alter Rebbe immediately begins to clarify much of what we have talked about, or really I've talked about. Everyone's been too polite to interrupt me. As to what this term tachtonim means. Literally, it means bottom. In modern Hebrew, it means tachtoin means what it means undergarments. I mean, it sounds kind of, if you say this to a modern Israeli, they'll give you a funny look. But this is what it means. Now, when we talk about up and down, Hashem doesn't have an up and down. There's no spatial concept when it comes to Hashem. God is everywhere. God is in Atzilus. God is in Yom Kippur. God is in the bank. God is in my ordinary, even in the parking lot where you're saying Tillim. So, quote unquote, what's the difference? Regardless of whether I'm aware of Hashem, he's there anyway. So what true impact do I have? God is there whether I notice him or I don't notice him. God is there whether I'm attentive or ignoring him. God is truly everywhere. And so on. The point is, truly, as we say every day in the davening, there is no difference. Creation has no impact on Hashem. Now, here's where we have a very delicate balance. On the one hand, creation has no impact on Hashem. On the other hand, creation is Hashem's absolute most passionate desire. Well, which one is it? Does it have no impact? So we have to understand what we mean by that term, no impact. On the surface, it sounds almost like, I don't care. What do I care? That's not important to me. But what we mean in this context, when we say that it has no impact, we mean it's not outside of him. My hand is not significant to me. It is me. It's me. It's who I am. It's not something about me that comes and goes. So in English, where we live in a world of physics and measurement, and two items can't occupy the same space, if I say that something has no impact on me, it's essentially saying, what do I care? I don't care. It's meaningless. I don't care. And it's almost semi-childish to say, well, if you don't care, what'd you go and create the whole world for? It means it doesn't change Hashem in his essence. What is changed is the awareness. A parent is a parent of a child when the child is an infant, when the child is 10, and when the child is grown and off on their own with their own family. Even if the child doesn't need anything from the parent, what the child truly needs is the parent. What do you need your parent for? You know how to take care of yourself. You don't need someone to teach you how to balance your checkbook or make your lunch or teach you how to drive. You're already an adult. It's not that they need something, they need them. And that's what Hashem is seeking. He needs, again, we say that word, people get very excited about it or irritated about it, but we understand what it means. It's an uplift, it's a higher level. That Hashem is the same way. It's not that he needs something, because if I need somebody to do something for me, I don't need them. Again, tachlis, I need something from them. And if I can get that something without them, I don't need them at all. I discard them. Once I get the thing, I discard them. So the needs that degrade us and the needs that uplift us. Okay, we'll continue. Next week is Shavuot.